Late December 1944. A German soldier, a veteran of 4 years of war, hears the familiar whistle of incoming American artillery. He knows the routine. Press deep into the foxhole and wait for the muffled thud of impact in the snow. But the thud never comes. Instead, a sharp, violent crack splits the air directly overhead. A storm of hot metal sibes downwards, from an impossible angle, defeating the very cover meant to save him. He survives, but as the strange airbursts repeat along the front, a chilling realization spreads. Their foxholes are no longer safe. This terrifying effect was the product of a top-secret American technology, the VT, or proximity fuse. It was a device so revolutionary, its importance was considered second only to the atomic bomb. For years, a strict directive had forbidden its use over land, where a single uncaptured dud could betray the entire project to the enemy. But in the chaos of the Ardennes offensive, that rule was deliberately broken. The question is why? What could possibly justify risking one of the war's most guarded secrets for a single, desperate battle? The answer begins not in the frozen forests of Belgium, but years earlier, in the sterile quiet of a university laboratory. The problem wasn't infantry in foxholes, it was enemy aircraft in the sky. By 1940, naval anti-aircraft gunnery was in crisis. Planes were becoming too fast, too agile. Hitting them with shells that relied on mechanical timers, fuses that had to be manually set to explode at a predicted altitude, was like trying to shoot a bullet with another bullet. The odds were abysmal. The challenge fell to a team of civilian scientists at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, led by physicist Merle Tuvey. Their task, assigned by the nation's top scientific body, sounded like science fiction. Build a complete, functioning radio transmitter and receiver, small enough to fit in the nose of an artillery shell. But the true test was survival. This delicate package of vacuum tubes, batteries, and wires had to withstand the single most violent event in conventional warfare, being fired from a cannon. It had to endure forces exceeding 20,000 Gs, an instantaneous shock that would pulverize any ordinary electronic device. After 2 years of relentless trial and error, they succeeded. The device, officially designated the VT fuse, for variable time, was a masterpiece of miniaturization. It worked by emitting a simple radio wave. When the shell neared a target, like the metal skin of an aircraft, the reflected signal would be picked up by the fuse's receiver, closing a circuit and detonating the shell. Proximity was all that mattered. But this incredible advantage created a strategic nightmare. The Allied High Command, terrified of the technology falling into enemy hands, issued a strict directive. The fuse was for use only over water, where any unexploded shell would sink without a trace. The fear was specific and rational. If the Germans captured a working fuse, they could reverse engineer it and deploy it in their own anti-aircraft defenses. The vast fleets of Allied bombers attacking the Reich would be decimated. The cost of losing the secret was deemed far greater than the benefit of using it on land. So the weapon sat in reserve, its immense potential against ground troops noted in reports, but officially forbidden. It would take a military disaster of the highest order to force command to reconsider that rule. That disaster struck before dawn on December 16, 1944. A massive German offensive tore through the thin American lines in the Ardennes forest. Surprise was total. In the initial days, U.S. forces were in disarray, falling back under the weight of the assault. Compounding the crisis, a blanket of thick fog and snow grounded the Allies' single greatest advantage, their overwhelming air power. As reports of collapsing positions flooded headquarters, a sense of controlled panic gripped the Allied High Command. In a series of urgent, top-secret communications between General Eisenhower's staff in Europe and the War Department in Washington, the forbidden topic was forced back onto the table. The strategic risk of the fuse being captured was now weighed against the immediate, catastrophic danger of a breakthrough on the Western Front. The gamble was approved. On Christmas Day, December 25th, Eisenhower received formal authorization to use the new fuses against ground targets. The teletype message carried a simple code word, POZIT. Immediately, the first shipments of VT fuse shells were released from specially guarded depots in France and rushed to select artillery battalions. The secret was out of the box. For the artillery crews receiving the new ammunition, the crates looked identical to any other, but the shells inside were different. Stenciled on each one was the code, VT. For the gunners, the firing procedure was almost the same. But for the German soldiers on the receiving end, the laws of physics themselves seemed to have changed. To understand why, you have to understand the brutal geometry of an explosion. A standard artillery shell hits the ground and detonates on impact. Most of its energy is wasted digging a crater, while the lethal fragments fly outwards and upwards, away from a soldier pressed flat in a foxhole. But the VT fuse was designed to deny its target that sanctuary. As the shell screamed towards the earth, its tiny radio transmitter sent out a continuous wave. When the signal reflected off the ground from a preset altitude, typically around 70 feet, the circuit closed. The shell detonated in midair. This created a perfect, controlled airburst. Instead of a useless crater, the explosion formed a devastating cone of shrapnel. Thousands of jagged steel fragments, raining almost straight down. For infantry caught in the open, it was catastrophic. But its true terror was reserved for soldiers in defensive positions. The foxholes and trenches they had spent hours digging, the very earth they trusted to protect them, now offered no cover from this vertical storm of steel. The first major POZIT fire missions were unleashed on December 26th. American forward observers, huddled in frozen outposts, watched in disbelief. One German assault, forming up in the open to attack positions held by the 2nd Infantry Division, was targeted by a single battalion of 155mm howitzers using the new fuses. The observers reported back, their voices laced with astonishment. The German formation didn't just break, it vanished. Attacks were shattered before they could even begin. Along the front, the reports were the same. A forward observer for the 75th Infantry Division noted that where a conventional barrage would merely force the enemy to take cover, the new airbursts were annihilating them. Entire companies were being shredded. To the men watching from the American lines, it looked like a rain of lethal steel that simply erased the enemy from the landscape. The artillery, long a powerful tool, had suddenly become something else entirely. It had become a weapon of precision lethality against which there was no apparent defense. From the German perspective, the effect was pure, terrifying confusion. Their initial after-action reports from late December contained no mention of a new Allied weapon. They couldn't. The secret was too well kept. Instead, German commanders reported something they found almost as unnerving. American artillery had suddenly achieved an impossible, supernatural level of skill. Unit diaries complained of unbelievably accurate fire and a terrible, demoralizing effect. Experienced officers, trying to analyze the attacks, were baffled. They noted the strange absence of impact craters, a clear sign of airbursts. But their training offered only two explanations for this. Either the Americans were scoring 1 in a million direct hits on tree branches directly above their positions, or they were using timed fuses with a degree of precision that was simply unheard of. They concluded the latter. They believed, in a testament to the fuse's effectiveness, that every American artilleryman had somehow, overnight, become a master gunner capable of calculating the perfect burst height for every single shell. But as Christmas passed, and the Ardennes offensive stalled, that explanation began to fray. The impossibly lucky airbursts were no longer the exception. They were the rule. Barrage after barrage produced the same perfect, devastating pattern. The sheer statistical improbability became undeniable. No gun crew on Earth could be that good, that consistently. The psychological impact, especially on the less experienced Volksgrenadier divisions, was immense. A veteran soldier knows what to do when the shells start falling. You get low, you get in a hole, you trust your cover. The VT fuse destroyed that fundamental trust. A letter found on a fallen German soldier described the new artillery as the most demoralizing weapon he had ever faced, creating a feeling of utter helplessness. The belief that there was no safe place to hide, that a deep foxhole was just a pre-dug grave, was a unique and profound kind of terror that gnawed at the will to fight. The fuse appeared to be the perfect weapon, a technological trump card that rendered all conventional infantry tactics obsolete. It broke attacks, shattered morale, and did it all while remaining a complete mystery to the enemy. It was, it seemed, unstoppable. But it wasn't. The fuse's advanced design was also its Achilles heel. The tiny radio that gave it its lethal intelligence was exquisitely sensitive. Too sensitive. Official reports noted that heavy rain, or, critically for the Ardennes, a dense blizzard could fool the fuse's sensor. The shell would mistake the thick curtain of falling snow for the ground and detonate harmlessly, thousands of feet in the air. The very terrain of the battle also worked against it. In the thick fir forests of the Ardennes, the dense tree canopy could trigger the fuses prematurely, creating an airburst high above the German positions. The trees would absorb much of the shrapnel, effectively acting as a shield for the soldiers hiding below. Finally, the fuse was a force multiplier, not a magic bullet. It amplified the lethality of accurate artillery fire. A poorly aimed barrage of proximity fuse shells was still just an expensive, poorly aimed barrage. This seemingly perfect weapon was, in reality, a conditional one. Its success depended on clear weather, open terrain, and the fundamental skill of the men firing it. So if the conditions of the battle often conspired against it, how did the Americans manage to deploy this secret weapon to create its most legendary and devastating effects? The answer was to combine the new fuse with an existing, brutally effective artillery doctrine, time on target, or TOT. This wasn't just firing multiple guns, it was a feat of mathematical orchestration. Dozens of howitzers, sometimes from separate battalions spread across miles of terrain, would independently calculate their firing solutions, their trajectory, elevation, and timing, all calibrated to land on a single target grid at the exact same second. A standard TOT strike was devastating, but when combined with the POZIT shells, the result was apocalyptic. For a German infantry or panzer unit caught assembling for an attack, there was no warning. No familiar whistle of incoming shells, no time to dive for cover. One moment, the cold winter air was still. The next, the entire sky above them erupted. It was a grid of hundreds of overlapping airbursts, a perfectly synchronized, inescapable curtain of steel that materialized from nowhere. An entire square kilometer of forest floor could be turned into a kill zone in a single, terrible instant. This was the ultimate synthesis. The fuse's technology, the gunner's mathematical skill, and the commander's tactical doctrine, all converging into one cataclysmic moment. The sharp, violent crack of the airburst that so terrified that German soldier in his foxhole was not a random event. It wasn't a lucky shot or some supernatural act of war. It was the sound of a calculated gamble, made in the highest echelons of Allied command, paying off on the frozen front line. The decision to unleash the proximity fuse over land was a turning point within the battle. While it did not win the Ardennes offensive single-handedly, it inflicted casualties on attacking German infantry at a rate they could not sustain. It broke up countless assaults and, as German military planners would later admit, delivered a psychological blow from which many units never recovered. The story of the fuse in the Ardennes is not simply about a new piece of technology. It is about a secret advantage, held in reserve for years, being unleashed at the precise moment of maximum crisis to blunt an enemy's final, desperate offensive. The final lesson of the posit fuse is a stark one. The war's second greatest secret was not the apocalyptic force that could level a city. It was a tiny radio that transformed the empty air above a soldier's head into the most dangerous place on Earth.